Hi, everyone. Welcome again to the Library Talks. I'm Kelly Chu. I'm going to be tonight's guide for your talk with our amazing guest, Marissa Meyer. I'm excited tonight to also have two fabulous teen moderators who are here to ask some of their questions for Marissa, and they're going to be helping us throughout the evening. Can you guys come over and introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Ashita. I'm a current senior in high school, and I am an avid YA fan, so I'm really excited for this opportunity.
Hi, I'm Shubra, and I'm an 8th grader, and I'm also a huge fan of Marissa Meyer. I've read all of her books, at least twice.
Thank you, guys. So they're going to have some questions for us coming up. And tonight we're going to be taking questions in two ways. So libraries, you can see a Q&A thing, or hopefully you can, on the side of your video. And we'll be taking questions throughout the night from there. And then if you have a smartphone, you can also ask a question on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @thelibrarytalks, and the hashtag is #LibTalks. So we'll be taking questions through both. And before we get started, again, I have one more really thrilling thing to announce, which is that Marissa has very generously offered to let us give away 2 copies of her upcoming novel, Heartless, to someone who asked the question tonight. So we're going to be randomly selecting someone from a library and someone from Twitter. So make sure you put your names in, and we will announce the winners at the end. So without further ado, let me announce the star tonight. Marissa Meyer is a USA Today and New York Times bestselling author of the Lunar Chronicles, which includes Cinder, Scarlet, Cress, Winter, and Fairest. Tonight, she's joining us from her home in Tacoma, Washington. Marissa, are you with us?
I am. Hello.
Fabulous. So I'm actually going to start us off tonight with a personal question from me. Back in 2012, when Cinder came out, I was in New York interviewing for editorial positions, and I got asked in an interview, what do you think is a really fabulous recent cover? And I said, Cinder has an amazing cover, and I got the job, so thanks.
Well done. Good answer.
So I wanted to know if you could tell us a little bit about your cover art, because you've had some really fabulous covers for this series, and could you tell us how they came about, what kind of influence you had on them, and if you like them?
Yeah, well, I love my covers. Let's start with that. They're fabulous and beautiful. I have very little to do with the covers. Like most authors, especially with the first few books, it would be my publisher has a designer on staff who would kind of come up with the concept for the cover art, and then they hired a freelance illustrator named Michael O, who was obviously incredibly talented. And they would put the cover together, and then one day they would email it to me and say, okay, Marissa, here's your cover. You love it. And that was pretty much the end of the discussion. But I lucked out. I've always thought the covers have been phenomenal. Beginning with Fairest and Winter, I was allowed to have a little bit more input, and Macmillan, my publisher, has been wonderful about taking my input. But for the most part, I mean, it's by far them. I am by no means the genius behind that operation. And I feel very, very lucky to have such great cover art.
And there are obviously a bunch of foreign editions. Do you have any foreign edition covers that are your favorite?
I can never remember which countries publish which covers. But I think I want to say, is it the Korean ones that I think are really amazing? I think it's Korean, maybe, I'm not sure. But the Cinder one has this fabulous picture of the carriage, Cinderella's carriage, all in gold filigree. And then if you look closely, there's this 100% metal girl, very kind of creepy, ominous girl sitting through the window. And it's beautiful and creepy at the same time. And that one I always thought was very striking. But there's been a lot of really phenomenal foreign language covers. So I've loved them. And there have been some that I have not loved so much, but it's a give and take.
Yeah. So I'm actually going to introduce our teen moderators back, and they've got a few questions for you. So they're just going to take over for a few minutes.
Sounds good. Hello again.
Hi. So I had a few questions regarding the character of Cinder. So Obviously, as I was reading your novel, I noticed that there was many similarities to the original Cinderella story, but there were also a lot of deviations in that Cinder is a very strong, independent woman who fights for the people she loves and what she believes is right. And I thought that was and that really stood out in stark contrast to the usual "someday my prince will come" trope. And so what I wanted to know was, did you initially set out to have a character that defied those classical stereotypical norms, or did that just come about as you were writing Cinder's character?
No, I think that it was intentional from the beginning, largely because as a reader, I am much more interested in reading stories about female protagonists who don't need to be rescued necessarily, or maybe they need to be rescued, but sometimes they can also be the rescuer. And with stories like Cinderella or Sleeping Beauty or Snow White, these classic fairy tales, I love classic fairy tales, and I have for many, many years. But they're such skeletal stories. They have these very iconic elements to them, but you don't get to know the characters really in these old stories. So I had a lot that I could work with in retelling these characters and bringing Cinderella into this new futuristic world. And so really from the beginning, I knew that she was not going to be a girl who just sits around waiting for her prince to come. I wanted her to be someone who had dreams and goals that went beyond even getting the prince. She has other things in her world going on that she's concerned about, and changes that she's trying to bring about. Of course, getting the prince is always a lovely side effect, but I knew that was not going to be the main focus of this story.
Mm-hmm. Great. Another thing that I was curious about was something that I noticed regarding the setting. So in most YAs, YA novels and dystopian YA novels, it's set in kind of a post-apocalyptic United States, or that it's implied that it is part of the Western world. But what I found really interesting was all of the Asian influences throughout Cinder and how it's set in New Beijing. And so I kind of just wanted to. I was wondering what prompted you to choose something that was so different from the norm, and something set in not part of the Western world.
Yeah. Well, my original concept for the series as a whole was that I wanted all of the books to have a very global feel. I knew that we were going to be dealing with this plague that is ravaging the planet, and I knew that there was going to be this species, these lunars, who were attempting to wage war across Earth. And so I wanted it to feel like these are problems that are affecting every person on the planet, not just Americans, not just Westerners. So from the beginning, I knew that I wanted the books to change settings from book to book, and to have this more international concept of the settings. As far as choosing China specifically for Cinder, I made that decision because many scholars believe that the earliest recorded version of the Cinderella story comes to us from 9th century China. And it was a story called Ye Shen. And if you read it, it is obviously the story of Cinderella. Like, there's this girl and she's forced to be a servant in her household, and she goes to the festival and meets the king and loses her shoe, and he has to track her down, and like, it's so obviously Cinderella. And that story was written 700 years before the Brothers Grimm, on the other side of the planet. So knowing that history of the story, I wanted to set Cinder in China to kind of have this, what I thought would be kind of a cool cyclical feel, that you have this very, very old story of Cinderella set in China, and now you have this far future story set in China. So that was kind of my motivation there.
That's really interesting. Cool. So now I'll hand it over to my sister.
Hi.
Your sisters.
Yeah. We're the Marissa Meyer fan sisters. So from your fan pages, I learned that CINDER was initially a NaNoWriMo project. Did you partake in this project as a fun activity, or was it your intention from the start to finish off an entire novel? And do you still participate in NaNoWriMo?
I do. I have done Nano, I think all but 1 year for like the last 9 years. And I did it last year, but I don't think what I wrote last year will ever come to light. We'll see. So for me, doing Nano, it's a little bit of both. I do it because I love the challenge of it, and I love the community of National Novel Writing Month. I find it to be a very motivating, inspiring time of the year. Just knowing that you have this goal, and so do 300,000 of your favorite friends also have this goal. And so I just think it's a really fun thing to participate in. With CINDER was my 3rd time doing NaNoWriMo, but it was the first time that I was working on a project that I felt very strongly that I wanted to finish and revise and edit and attempt to get published. So I did start writing CINDER for NaNoWriMo, but with the hope and the goal that eventually I'd be able to get it published.
Interesting. So noting that CINDER is a reimagining of Cinderella, what led you to choose a fairy tale or a princess story as the basis of your book? And was there like a particular aspect of the original Cinderella story that you were particularly drawn to, or you felt that you had to reshape into something even more better?
Well, I think Cinderella has been one of my favorite fairy tales for a long time, largely because I find this story to be so very universal, as we see from the story being told in China and Europe and all over the world. I've heard, I don't know if it's true, but I've heard that every culture ever known to record stories has had some form of the rags to riches tale. And so I think that it just appeals to us on such a very deep human point, this idea that no matter where you are in life, by doing good things, being a good person, and letting your goodness and kindness shine, that you can be elevated to a higher standing in your life. I think that's something that appeals to everyone on a very deep human level. As far as what I'm trying to remember, your other question was what drew me to doing fairy tale retellings in the first place. It actually came about with a writing contest many years ago. Long ago, I used to write fan fiction for the Japanese anime Sailor Moon. And one day I saw a fan fiction contest that was being hosted on a Sailor Moon website. And the girl that was hosting the contest had made a list of like 10 things, and you had to choose 2 things from the list and include them in a short story. So from that list, I chose to set my story in the future and to include a fairy tale character. And I ended up writing this like Sailor Moon, it was a Puss in Boots retelling. So it was like a mashup of Sailor Moon and Puss in Boots and Star Wars and Firefly and like all of these like things that I thought would be really cool. And I mashed them into a story and submitted it to this writing contest. And then a couple of weeks later, I found out that my story was one of only 2 stories that were entered into the contest.
Wow.
And mine came in 2nd place. I did not win. But I came away from that thinking that I absolutely loved this concept of combining fairy tales and science fiction. And back at that time, I couldn't find that anybody had done that before. And I thought there's a lot of potential there. And so really the very seed of an idea for this whole series began with the idea that I'm going to write a series of futuristic fairy tale retelling.
Yeah, that's really, well, the end result was fantastic. So.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you guys. So our teams are going to bow out, and I'm going to start taking questions because we have so many from our other libraries. From San Jose Public Library, Rachel asks, why did you decide to make Lunars people who care so much about outward beauty?
that's one of those things that didn't really feel like making a decision for me. It just came naturally from the story. But I think that I am very fascinated with the concept of beauty. And it's something that you see over and over in fairy tales. Cinderella is the most beautiful of her, her stepsisters are very ugly, but she's beautiful. Snow White of course, is one of the most obvious examples of this queen being the most fairest of them all, but then being threatened by her young but beautiful stepdaughter. And so beauty is a theme that you see over and over in fairy tales, and the good and the bad of it. And so that was just a theme that I think appeals to me as a writer, and one that I wanted to kind of explore. And so this was how I ended up doing that.
I've got a question from Twitter. Stacy asks, how much technology research did you do before writing about a cyborg?
I did a ton of research. I read an entire book on cyborgs and cybernetics. But before that, when I decided I was going to be writing a science fiction series, the very first thing that I did was I went to my local library and I checked out a bunch of copies of Scientific American magazine, and just started reading through the articles just to get ideas for, what are scientists working on right now? What is the current technology that they're excited about? What do they think is going to be the technology of the future? And that gave me a ton of ideas for the technology that I could consider including in the series. So that was really, really inspirational. And then as I kind of narrowed it down and figured out specifically, okay, I know I'm going to have a cyborg character, so I should research cyborgs and cybernetics. And I know I have androids, so I should research artificial intelligence. There's space travel, there's moon colonization, all of these different elements. And each one had to be very thoroughly researched in order to attempt to make it feel as real and authentic as I could. So there was a lot of research involved. But lucky for me, I love that. I'm one of those writers that enjoys the researching process, and it's hard to tear me away from it to okay, Marissa, you should start writing now. You have enough information, go do something productive. So it's not a problem for me. I thought it was all fascinating.
So as a follow-up question, since you said you read Scientific American, you wanted a sci-fi fairy tale, there are elements of Cinder and its siblings that are very sci-fi, hard science fiction, they feel. And then there are other elements the bioelectricity thing that are a little more fuzzy, almost science fantasy.
Yes. Yeah, I come from
that would be the genre of your own work.
Sorry, I think your mic cut out there for a second.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I heard the question, but I'll talk anyway. Yeah, so I come from a much more fantasy background. I always expected that my first books would be fantasy. When I first started trying to write novels when I was a teenager, they were always, high fantasy about princesses and dragons and elves and warlocks and all of that. And so that was really my passion as a writer for many, many years, until I had this idea about sci-fi fairy tales. And I was like, well, I can't pass this up because it's the coolest idea ever. So to me, it's not really surprising that it kind of ended up being this amalgamation of science fiction and fantasy. However, I did attempt, even though there are obvious fantasy elements with the lunars and the glamour and all of this, I did try to keep it a sci-fi story, and that even though these are fantasy elements, I attempted to give each one some sort of scientific explanation. So with bioelectricity, that's a real thing. All living creatures do create it. And some creatures like sharks have been known to detect bioelectricity in their prey. Birds use it to migrate. So there's other examples in nature of animals, being able to detect it. And then one of the most interesting things that I found when I was researching this was that, so I started researching brainwashing and how might you brainwash a person if you wanted to do that, as a person looks up sometimes. And there were studies done back in World War II that found that if you like put pulses of electricity into certain parts of the human brain, you can impact what a person thinks and their emotions at that moment. And sometimes they would have like visions of things and all of these different things. So I kind of took that idea and the idea of this bioelectricity, and that's how you ended up with Lunar.
Ah,
Yeah.
very nice. Okay,
Very scientific.
science. So Amiri from San Leandro Public Library wants to know who your favorite characters are in the Lunar Chronicles.
Oh,
That's tough. That's like picking your children.
I know, it is tough. And I honestly don't know that I have a favorite or favorites. I feel like, I mean, I've known these characters for so many years now that they all kind of feel like my best friends, that we just sort of hang out together sometimes. I will say that the funny ones are my favorite ones to write. They tend to be the easiest for me to write and almost feel like they're writing themselves. So like Eco, Cinder's android best friend, was always a hoot, and I loved every scene she was in. And then Captain Thorn was one of those characters that just knew exactly who he was from the moment he showed up on the page. And there would be times when I would be writing a scene with Thorn and he would say something ridiculous and I would like stop writing. And sometimes writers like have these little conversations with their characters and I would stop and be like, really, Thorn? That's where you want to go with this? And every time he'd be like, that's where we're going with it. And yeah, so he was just one of those characters that just kind of did his own thing, which made it really fun for me as the writer.
Yeah, well, I have to confess, Thorn is actually my favorite character. So I'm glad that he's
You're not alone.
So as a follow-up to that, Lilia, Tomiko, Lexi, and Kamiya from Castro Valley Library want to ask you, do you cry when you kill the best characters or do you laugh?
I don't laugh. I'm laughing now because it's funny. But no, I do cry. I do cry when characters die. I don't like saying that when I kill them because it's not me. Like there are things happening in the story that lead to their death. It's not my choice. So yeah, a lot of characters. In this series, the hardest one for me was the death at the end of Scarlet, and I won't say who it is in case we have people in the audience who haven't read it yet. But the death at the end of Scarlet was really, really hard. And that one is one that's kind of stuck with me as a writer. But yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that when you're writing a story in which lives are constantly at stake, sometimes bad things are going to happen. And so I get very, very attached to my characters, but I'm also always resigned to the fact that sometimes some of them are going to die. And then readers tell me that they're cried, and I do secretly feel glee.
So I've had actually a few questions on Twitter about this, one from Anna and one from Avni about Flynn Rider. And when Tangled came out, were you surprised that Flynn was kind of like Thorn?
Yes, I had written the first draft of Cress before they even started promoting Tangled. And I remember the first time I saw a preview for Tangled, and it was like the preview that shows him sneaking into the tower and like, and here comes the smolder, like that scene. And I was like, oh my God, they stole my prince.
They ripped you off.
Did you? So it was definitely like that moment. And then you have to question, like, can I still do this? Am I going to get in trouble? But I had already written this draft, and I thought, well, maybe there's room for 2 Captain Thorn / Flynn Riders in the world. So I didn't change it, which I'm very glad that I didn't get all as concerned about it as maybe some others would. I don't know. But yeah. So yes, I was surprised, but also pleased. I mean, I love Flynn Rider. I think he's one of the greatest Disney characters out there. So I'm certainly no complaints from me.
Okay, I've got a question from one of our patrons here at Santa Clara City. I love the retelling of fairy tales. What made you think of putting it in a post-apocalyptic or cyberpunk world?
Yeah, so it really all goes back to that first writing contest all those many, many years ago, and just this idea of combining sci-fi and fairy tales I thought was so cool. And so I thought, I'm going to write a whole series of these. As far as like cyberpunk, like I don't even think I had heard of the term cyberpunk. I'm not sure when that like became a thing. So it wasn't really that's not really what I was going for necessarily. But I think it's a really cool term, so we'll go with it. For me, my favorite term for this series is space opera. I really love to think of it as space opera. It feels very big.
I feel like that's something Cress would say.
Yeah.
Let's see, I've got a question from, where'd it go? Sunnyvale Library loves Marissa Meyer. I'm just going to share that. Sophia from Alameda Library asks, if there was a movie made out of your series, who would you want to play Cinder?
Ooh, I don't know. I'm really, really bad with these questions. There's one, oh gosh, am I gonna be able to think of her name? Gosh, there's one girl. I'm not gonna be able to think of her name. I'm like super bad when it comes to pop culture and celebrities.
Girl
and
with
stuff.
the face. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm gonna take a pass on that question. I will say that my favorite fan casting for Thorn is Sam. Sam, not Carlisle. Sam, help me out. Claflin. Sam Claflin.
Oh, someone here knew. Yeah, my teen knew.
The teens always knew. The teens are totally tapped into this thing. Anyways, for people who have no idea who that is, he's the guy that plays Finnick in the Hunger Games.
Oh,
I think would make an excellent Captain Thorn.
That I agree.
Yeah.
So someone from Sunnyvale Library has asked, how far did you plan out the books? Was there a really, really long editing process?
Yes, there was a very, very long editing process, but I am a planner. I'm a huge planner, and so I actually had the whole series outlined before I started writing it. So on one hand, like I had a really good idea of where the story was heading and like the major plot points that I wanted to hit in every book and the major ways that the story would kind of come together and the different characters would relate to each other and how all of their stories intertwined. So I knew the gist of the big stuff from really, really early on. However, in writing it, things always change and you get new ideas that are even better, or things happen in the plot that you weren't expecting, but you think, well, that's way better than what I was planning, so you go with it. So there's always things that change. And I would actually it would be interesting.
Uh-oh. We're in trouble.
Outline, I did attempt to have a solid plan from the beginning.
Yeah, so I remember when Cinder came out on the flyleaf, it said like all the names of like all the rest of the series and like the year, and I was like, that is a bold move, Fywell and Friends. Like, so did you have like drafts of all of them, or were they just like super optimistic?
No, when it sold, I had drafts. So Cinder was pretty much done, and there was very little editing to be done, even with my publisher. And then I had drafts completed of Scarlet and Cress, and I had an outline written for Winter. So it was very far along, even at that early stage. However, then, so I finished Scarlet, finished Cress, those were both on schedule, but then with Winter, I completely underestimated how much time Winter was going to take, and it just kept getting bigger and longer and more subplots and more characters, and it just became such a beast of a story. So we did, as I'm sure many of you recall, we did have to push winter back almost a year from the original plan. But in the end, I think it worked out, and I was really grateful to have that extra time to try to make the best book that I could. And I'm really, really happy with how winter turned out.
That's fabulous. So I've actually got a question from Wood County District Public Library in Ohio, who will be watching this.
Ohio? What time is it in Ohio?
They'll be watching the recorded version of this, but they were so excited that they emailed me some questions. Cassie G asks, my favorite part of the Lunar Chronicles is how deftly the 4 fairy tales are woven together and how well they blend into the same universe. How early in your writing process did you know which stories you wanted to include, and was it hard to make them fit together?
I knew very, very early on. So when I had this idea that I was going to write a series of these fairy tale retellings, I started with making a list of some of my personal favorite fairy tales, and there were maybe a dozen or so on that list. And then I just kind of started throwing ideas at that list and like, how could I take this story, and if it were set in the future, what would some of the new elements be? How would I update it? How would it change? And the 4 stories that I ended up going with were the ones that even way back then I felt like I had the best ideas for. I was getting the most excited about them. And they were largely chosen because even in those early stages, I could already begin to see how they would connect to each other. So that's been a focus from the very beginning, was trying to weave them together in a way that felt natural, and like it was inevitable as a part of this story that all of these characters would fit together and all of these subplots and storylines would fit together, while still maintaining that, okay, this is the Cinderella plot, this is the Little Red Riding Hood, this is the Rapunzel book, this is the Snow White book. So it was something that I was really thinking about and plotting out from the very, very beginning.
Way ahead.
Yeah.
Let's see. I've had a few questions on if there is any TV or movie series for the Lunar Chronicles in the works, or in your dreams, or in anyone's dreams.
In my dreams, absolutely. No, there's nothing in the works exactly. The rights have sold, so there is a studio that has the rights to the books. And as of about a month ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, I heard that studio was seriously considering them and had possibly moved them up to be one of their next projects. So that was, weeks ago, and Hollywood is slow, but it seemed really, really promising. So fingers are crossed. I hope so. I really, really hope it happens. That would just be amazing.
That would be fabulous. I see a miniseries. Let's see. Let's talk about a little bit about some of your influences. So you've talked a lot about how you love fairy tales, and you wrote Sailor Moon fanfic. Natalia from Alameda has asked, has Firefly had any impact on the Lunar Chronicles?
Oh, yes. How could you tell? No, Firefly and Star Wars are my 2 main sci-fi loves. And I have watched the entire season of Firefly, I don't know how many times. And it was really a huge inspiration for me, both in the setting of it. I loved how Firefly had this combination of this world in which parts of the world are very clean and orderly and high-tech and fancy. And then it had parts of the world that were very kind of grungy and grubby and dirty. And I loved that combination of the two. And so that was a big inspiration for me in trying to just build the world and the types of settings that you might come across. And then with Firefly, I absolutely loved any scene in which you had these characters like bickering at each other, and it just had the best dialogue and interactions between the characters. And so that was a really big inspiration for me. And I just kind of wanted to take all of these characters from all different walks of life and throw them on a spaceship and see what happened. So it was absolutely a huge influence. And yeah, yes.
I've got a question from Burlingame Public Library. From Tekla, Brianna, Miranda, and Piper would like to know, how did you write settings for places you've never been to?
Lots and lots of research. So some of my favorite ways to research places that I have never been to, travel guides are amazing, because travel guides do a really good job of highlighting sensory details. You know, they love to go into the food of a place and the flora and the fauna and the overall atmosphere. So they can be really great resources. And then also Google Maps, like for Paris, when Scarlett is walking from the train station to the theater, I went on Google Maps and literally walked, not literally, the opposite of literally, figuratively walked those streets, and tried to, okay, there's a statue there that I'm going to put in the books, or this street has a lot of window boxes, so I can use that as a detail, and those sorts of things to try to get to make it as realistic to the actual scene setting as possible.
Great. So Google is responsible for so many things tonight. I've got a question from David on Twitter. He wants to know, who would you love to collaborate with, and what book idea would you love to explore? And I think this might be a segue a little bit into talking about your new anthology that you have.
I don't have any authors specifically in mind that I would want to collaborate with. There are, of course, a billion authors that I admire and respect hugely, but I am a complete total control freak, and so I don't know, it would be really, really hard for me to work on a project with someone and give up half of the control, and so I don't know, I think I would really struggle with that. I think that it would be the sort of thing where they would eventually regret wanting to work with me, so I don't know that I'm really a collaboration sort of author, but who knows, never say never. Maybe the right partner and the right project will come about someday. And then you mentioned the anthology that's coming out. I actually have it sitting here on my desk because I've been reading it, and it's brilliant. Yes, it's called, for you guys, it's called A Tyranny of Petticoats. It's edited by Jessica Spotswood, who's amazingly talented, and I adore her. And it's 15 stories, historical fiction, all takes place in America, but from all different places and time periods. And the focus is on very strong and diverse female heroines. And I've read, I think I'm on the sixth or seventh story now, and they've all been amazing, and I'm really, really honored to be included in it. So it's out next Tuesday. Yes, a week from today. So check it out.
Yeah, it is out a week from today. Yeah, everyone go buy it. Or check it out at your library, I should say. So, I've distracted myself.
Setting that plug in.
I'm trying to get it in. So speaking of things you have coming up, I've had a bunch of questions on Twitter about Heartless, which we are giving away 2 copies of. So everyone stand by at the end.
Too. Look, I have everything on my desk. So, everything that you guys want is sitting here on my desk right now.
Could you give us a little sneak peek of what we can expect in Heartless?
Oh gosh, yes. What would you like to know? Let me see. So Heartless
it's a prequel to Alice in Wonderland, right?
It is. It is a prequel to Alice in Wonderland, completely separate from the Lunar Chronicles. It's a fantasy-based story set in Lewis Carroll's Wonderland, or at least my interpretation of Lewis Carroll's Wonderland. And it tells the origin of the Queen of Hearts. So it's about a girl named Catherine who starts out just wanting to be a baker. She loves to bake. She's very good at it. And it's her dream to open a bakery with her best friend. However, the King of Hearts notices her and sets his sights on her to become his next bride, or his bride. And so this causes some trouble with Catherine, and it starts to cause a lot of trouble for Catherine when she meets and begins to fall in love with the court joker. So that's the story, and in the end, we'll see her kind of go down this path that will eventually lead to her becoming the infamous Queen of Hearts.
Yeah, everyone, you can check that out at your public library too this fall.
And that's in November. That comes out in November.
This is a fun question from Haley at San Leandro Public Library. What is your favorite Harry Potter character, and what house would you be in?
I'm Ravenclaw. I am so Ravenclaw. You too?
Oh yeah.
Ravenclaw. Fist bump. As for my favorite characters, because it's the Weasley twins, I love them dearly. I've read the series multiple times, but I am listening to it on audiobook for the very first time. And so I'm a little into Goblet of Fire right now, and which is the one where the Weasley twins like really start. They have their wizarding wheezes, and they're just so great, and everything they do just cracks me up, and they're great characters.
Let's see. So many good questions, you guys. Thank you for sending so many amazing questions. Could you talk a little bit? We talked a little about your influences. So we talked about like how we love Firefly and how we love Sailor Moon. George Brown from I don't know what library, but hi George, wants to know what are your 3 favorite authors and books?
That's
a tough one.
I hate it when they ask you to narrow it down, your top 3. Okay, well, my favorite book of all time is probably Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. One of the few books that I feel like I can read over and over again and never get tired of. And then the Harry Potter series, like the entire Harry Potter series, I love. I'm a fangirl. After that, it starts to get murky, because after that, you have like 50 that are all vying for that third coveted spot. But a couple of favorites of mine, I loved the Shadow and Bone series by Leigh Bardugo, and her recent Six of Crows was equally brilliant.
She's going to be a guest here in June, everyone.
Okay. Like on the Google chat thing? Okay, you should watch her because she's fabulous and I adore her. I also thought that his Fair Assassin series by Robin Lefevre was one of the most perfectly crafted series I think that I've ever read. So I'm an enormous fan of hers as well.
Do you have anything that, because I know you get sent books to blurb and stuff like that, and you're all in the know. Is there anything like coming up that you're like really excited for and we should like look out for?
Gosh, the most recent one that I blurbed actually just came out today, maybe.
Happy publishing.
I'm looking for it on my bookshelf. I just realized I just loaned it to a friend, so I don't actually have it. But The Forbidden Wish by Jessica Corey was one that I blurbed, and it's a retelling of the Aladdin fairy tale or folk tale that I thought was very beautifully done, and I loved the way that she kept the story, but the changes that she made really added a lot to it. So I really, really enjoyed reading that one.
Oh, okay. I'll look out for that one.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I've read that's not out yet that I'm really excited for. I'm sure there are, but I don't know. I'm drawing a blank at this moment. I'll let you know if I think it's
something. You can post it on Twitter. So also in the vein of favorite books, you mentioned like Pride and Prejudice, Harry Potter. Could you tell us about a favorite book from childhood? Like a book that you read like a bunch of times as a kid?
I'm sorry, could you ask that again? It kind of froze up for a second.
Yeah, sorry. A favorite book from your childhood, like something you read a lot as a kid.
I read Charlie and the Chocolate Factory over and over and over when I was a kid. That was probably the one that caught me the most growing up. But then like also I loved the Little House on the Prairie books, were really big to me. Anne of Green Gables, I know I read that one numerous times. Classic. So, the greats, the classics.
I've got a question from Jennifer on Twitter. What author would you love to meet but would probably get you tongue-tied?
Oh, J.K. Rowling.
Oh.
Yeah, I know. It's, I will say, and I think that I behaved myself very well. But I was at an author festival recently, and we were at this like after party for all of the authors, and R.L. Stine ended up sitting at my table. And like I was like, there's that moment where like you try to play it cool, even though on the inside you're like, oh my god, it's R.L. Stine, and he's sitting here and talking to me like a human being. Yeah, that was a big moment.
I've got another question from our Ohio friends. My favorite part, this is from Narnia R. My favorite part of the Lunar Chronicles is Cress's name, how it's short for Crescent because she's a lunar, but it's also the name of a plant because she's Rapunzel, which is the name of a plant. Good job, guys. What fairy tale what fairy tale part of the series are you proudest of thinking?
Oh, good question. I will say that actually coming up with Cress's name is, I feel, one of my most genius moments. I was very, very proud of that one. As far as, other than that, the big bad wolf scene, the scene from Little Red Riding Hood where, she sees the wolf dressed up as her grandmother, and, what big eyes you have, what big teeth you have. It was kind of a struggle for me trying to figure out how to work that scene into the story. And then when I finally figured out, oh, this is how I'm going to do it, and it just felt so perfect and right for the story and right for the fairy tale. And I thought it made for a really cool kind of turning point in the story and in that sequence of events. So I was really proud how that one ended up working out too.
I've got a question from Tara B. I like this one. Where did the idea for Eco's personality glitch come from, and is there a Cinderella character that she was supposed to be?
So Eco kind of shares the role of the fairy godmother along with Peony and Dr. Erland. Like all three of them together kind of make up the fairy godmother. As far as her glitch, so the idea that Cinder was going to have this android friend was one of my very, very first concepts of the book, and how I was going to adapt it to this world. Mm-hmm. And so I knew really early on that Cinder was going to have this robot friend that would kind of follow her around. But my initial concept for Eco had been that she was going to be very computerized and very serious and logical and, practical and this very computerized personality. And then I sat down and started writing Cinder, and in that very first scene, Eco shows up and was immediately just like, well, that sounds really boring. I'm going to be like this instead. And, I'm going to hit on the prince and have this completely bizarre obsession with shoes, even though I don't have feet. And she just took over, and she was sort of like Thorn in that way, where she just knew exactly who she wanted to be, and there was nothing that I could really do to stop it. And so that was how she became her character. And then I had to come up with an explanation for it, why is a robot behaving this way? So I was like, personality glitch. Yeah. I will say on that line, I am actually writing a series, a duology of Lunar Chronicles graphic novels. The first one will come out next year, and they take place after winter, and Eco is the main character of the two graphic novels. And so in that story, you're going to see a lot more of Eco. It's going to kind of tell a little bit more about her past and how she developed this personality and whatnot. And it's been so much fun for me to write, and writing a graphic novel is one of my dreams. So it's been a lot of fun. So look for that next year.
Who's your illustrator?
I'm sorry?
Who's your illustrator?
His name is Douglas Holgate. And I haven't met him. I haven't actually even talked to him. We kind of always have our publisher going between us. I can tell you that he's from Australia, and he's brilliant. The artwork that I've seen so far has seriously turned me into this giddy teenager. I'm like, oh my goodness, my characters, and they're real. So it's been super, super cool watching it come to life like that.
Hey. So I can't let you go without asking you more about fan fiction. So Tomiko from Castro Valley asked, have you written any other fan fiction besides Sailor Moon?
No, well, I wrote way back in the day, I wrote one short story for the anime Rurouni Kenshin. If there's any anime fans,
could you tell us
more
what
obscure than
characters
Sailor
were in
Moon.
it?
I'm sorry?
I said, could you tell us what characters it involved?
It was a short love story between Aoshi and Kaoru? No. What's the girl's name? Aoshi and the girl that follows him around.
Kaoru?
Is it Kaoru? Or is Kaoru the one that loves Kenshin? I don't know. It's been so long.
Oh, you're right.
That was like 15 years ago.
Someone's gonna tell us.
Yeah, but Aoshi was my favorite character because he was so serious, and I was like, he just needs a girl to soften his heart.
And then someone at Sunnyvale has asked, have you ever read any of the fanfics that people have written about the Lunar Chronicles?
When I first heard, this was years ago now, when I first heard that there was Lunar Chronicles fan fiction, I literally ran around my house screaming and dancing like I was so excited. It was the best moment. And I went and sat down and found it in fanfiction.net and read, I think, just one story. And then like scanned some of the summaries of some of the other stories. And there was like 10 stories there at that point. And I read it, and it was something from Kai's perspective, I remember. And I had this moment like, okay, this is really, really cool, but I should probably not be reading this. And so I set it aside largely because I didn't want it to influence what I had planned for the series and the characters. But now, like, and people ask me this now that the series is done, do I plan on reading them? And it's hard because I am tempted. I am very, very curious. But at the same time, I think that if I had known, like, that the creator of Sailor Moon sometimes went and read Sailor Moon fan fiction, like, I think that would have created this weird mentality. Like, that would have made me a lot more uncomfortable maybe about sharing my work, about doing certain things. And I want the readers to feel like they can do whatever they want with this world and these characters now. So yeah, at this point I don't read it, but I am curious.
I think someone also asked on Twitter, and sorry, I can't remember who it is now, but someone asked, do you have any favorite fan art?
Oh gosh, so much. There has been so much amazing fan art. I just actually recently posted on my blog here a week or two ago these two artists. There's two like very short comics that these two authors created, artists, illustrators, and they are so good and sweet, and just these little brief little stories in the lives of the characters. They were incredibly heart-wrenching and perfect. So definitely go check those out. They're on my blog at marissameyer.com. Those are two that kind of, you know, hit me right in my heart and really made it feel very special. Like this is something very kind of special that we all get to enjoy together. So.
Lola from Alameda asks, are any of your characters based off you? Or to expand that, are any of your characters based off anyone real in your life?
Not intentionally. I think as a writer, you kind of go through life picking out traits and personality quirks that you might pick up from people around you. Just if you see something that seems really interesting, or they have a weird habit that you find fascinating, then you're kind of always gathering these together, and in theory, they come together to make a character. So there's definitely influence from people in the real world, but nobody that I've thought, okay, I'm going to take you and put you in a book. And as for myself, I mean, I think that there's a little bit of me in all of the characters, but the one that is most like me is definitely Cress. You know, we share that overactive imagination and this ability to kind of slip into these daydreams and fantasies at will, which is something that I think I've kind of been doing my whole life, which is largely what led to me wanting to be a writer.
Well, that segues perfectly into my next question for you, which is from Alameda and from Atascadero Library. We've had questions about any advice you have for writers?
There's so much advice and so many things that you could tell aspiring writers. The number one thing is always just going to be to write, and to write a lot. Everything you write, you're going to get better at it. It's like developing any skill, any talent. You have to do it and practice it in order to get better. On top of that, I like to particularly tell aspiring writers, when you're first starting out, not to worry too much about publication or the market or the audience that you're writing for, but rather just to focus on you and your writing and what is the story that you want to tell. Develop your craft, develop your voice, write the stories that you are really excited and passionate about, and only like once you've really cultivated that love of writing, then start worrying about publication and all of these other things, because publishing, it can and it is a roller coaster ride of emotions, and there can be a lot of rejection involved with it. But if you have that foundation of love for storytelling that you can come back to, then you're always going to be able to come back to that no matter what else is happening in your career.
That is very inspiring advice. Let's see. Well, along the vein of writing, I think we have time for one or two more questions. Benjamin from Alameda has asked, do you already know what will happen when you write, or do you let the writing flow with you? You said already that you kind of let some of your characters speak for themselves, but you also said you had 4 books outlined.
Yes, it's definitely a mix of both. I always start with an outline. And so for me, like my outlines, they're very sparse. They're not like super detailed, but I try to have a general idea of where the story is heading, and of the major plot points that I need to hit in order to get there. And that helps a lot just with keeping me focused and making sure that I am always heading towards something, as opposed to just kind of letting the characters meander around and figure things out as they go. Like I always need to have something that I'm working toward. But within that kind of roadmap, then the characters are always going to make their own decisions, or something, a plot twist comes out that surprises you that you didn't expect was going to happen. So the stories are always surprising me. And when that happens, I feel like if I'm surprised, then probably the reader will also be surprised. So I try to just kind of go with it.
Yeah. So I have, I think, one last question for you, which is YA novels have obviously been huge in the last few years. Did you always want to know you wanted to write YA, or did you ever think, oh, these are adult books, these are children's books?
Yeah, so when I was a teenager, we didn't have the YA distinction yet. And so I started writing fantasy, which I figured would just be published in the fantasy section of a bookstore. And my books were always about characters who were my age, who were 16, 17 years old, but they would go up and save the world and, have these great adventures. And I went to college and went into the real world and grew up, but my characters always stayed teenagers. And then about the time, I think, when Twilight was becoming so popular and suddenly everyone was talking about young adult fiction, and I remember hearing about that and thinking, oh, I think this is what I'm writing.
That's what I mean.
So it kind of just felt like a very natural fit. It was never a decision that I thought, I am going to write YA fiction because it's really popular right now. It's just kind of what I'd been writing all along without really realizing it.
And along this vein, since YA is really popular and there are a lot of common tropes that are going on, are there any tropes in YA that you love, or any cliches that you can't stand anymore?
I'm pretty burned out on love triangles. I think a lot of readers are. That said, I think that they can be done well. I just think that too often they feel more contrived than I wish that they would. As far as tropes that I love, I am still an enormous fan of love-hate relationships. I love those romances where they are constantly bickering and at each other's throats, but they secretly love each other. I've never been able to get enough of those. So who knows? Maybe I'll write one someday.
Yeah, maybe. So I have one last question for you tonight, and it's from the library I'm in right now, Santa Clara City. How long have you thought that you would like to be an author? When did you think you would write?
I don't remember not wanting to be a writer. I loved books ever since I was a little kid, and I remember like when I was little, I was always making up stories and telling stories. And even when I was like as young as 3 years old, I used to tell stories to my mom, and she would type them up for me, and then print them out and let me illustrate the pages. So I've been telling stories since I was a little kid. And I don't know at what point it occurred to me that this is something that you could do for a living, and that people would pay you to come up with stories. But as soon as I made that connection, I knew that this was what I wanted to do.
Yay, living the dream.
Yeah, it is, absolutely.
Okay, so I think that's all the questions that we have time for tonight, Marissa. Before we go, I just want to announce the winners of the ARCs. Our first winner, here we go, is Anna from Twitter. Anna, direct message us, and we will get your info. And our second winner is Rachel from San Jose Public Library. So San Jose Public Librarians, please find Rachel and get her address and send it to us so that Marissa can send her a fabulous ARC of Heartless. And thank you, everyone.
Congratulations, guys.
You guys were amazing. It looks so nice. So pretty.
It's so pretty. Look how shiny it is. Ooh.
Is that spot glass?
It is.
That's
like
nice.
foil. It's foil.
Oh, it's foil. Okay, this
And
is
I'm like super excited because it has a black title page,
oh man,
which means that I get to sign it in silver Sharpie.
This is the best. We should have all ARCs with black title pages to
I
make the
know.
authors feel some more special.
Little things in life.
It really is. So Marissa, thank you so much for being here tonight. This has been fabulous. Thank you to everyone who asked questions. This has been so much fun. Our next guest is going to be, is going to be in May, and it's going to be the fabulous and wonderful Patrick Rothfuss, author of The Name of the Wind. So for all you epic fantasy fans, we hope to see you back here. Thank you everyone for coming, and we hope to see you in May. Have a good night. Good night.
Thank you.